You can have a seat.
So when the one year my wife was at camp, we sang that song, and we were actually having a debate about that last line, "Your love never runs out on me." My interpretation was it's never ending, right? Like it's overflowing, it's never going to end. Her interpretation was it's never going to leave, right? It's never going to run out, like run out on them, right? So either way, I think it applies both, right? Both my wife and I can be right at the same time. That's amazing. But so anyways, that's what we're going to talk about this weekend. And like I said, it's been 8 months since we've been together, and that's the longest in my time of doing this camp ministry that it's ever been, because we've had fall retreats and we've had winter retreats and we've had camp in the summer, and we just haven't had that this year. But we want to be encouraging as you watch tonight and participate tomorrow about how Jesus lived his life. And if you've been a part of any camp that I've ever done, you know the rules. The two rules that I have are love God and love others. That's it. And we're going to look at a scripture tonight that kind of goes into that a little bit, about the Good Samaritan. We actually have hospitals named after this. My mom actually named her massage business after this. Like, the Good Samaritan is even people who don't go to church know about the Good Samaritan, but they may not know all the details surrounding it. So let's dive into it a little bit tonight. We're going to be in Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10, starting in verse 25. It says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. This was very common, unfortunately. He said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" See, he thought he was tricking him. But unfortunately, Jesus was pretty intelligent and knew and could see what was going on. He says, well, what is written in the law? The capital L law, meaning the Jewish law. He said, how do you read and interpret that law? The expert in the law stood up and he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself, this is not the passage I get my rules from, but he apparently has heard those same things that I had heard as well. Jesus says, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live the eternal life piece. But the teacher wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who would be my neighbor? Just like when his apostles said, how many times should I forgive, my neighbor? Should it be 7? Because that's a lot, right? Like somebody does the same thing to you 7 different times. And Jesus says, no, 70 times 7, right? And so the legalist in the group says, okay, 490 times. That's quick math. But anyways, that's not the truth. So he says, so who is my neighbor? So Jesus told him this parable. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. An interesting way to put it, by the way. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed on the other side. This was a priest, a Jewish priest, a leader in the Jewish church. So to a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed him on the other side. So for those of you who don't know, a Levite, all of the high priests came through that tribe of Israel, through the Levites. And so he was also a leader in the Jewish community. And he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper and said, look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? Which is interesting because this was a Jewish man, so the two Jewish spiritual leaders are really the neighbor. The Samaritan was from a different land. And for those of you who don't know, Samaritans were basically half Jewish, half Gentile, right? So they were looked down upon. Jewish people were not supposed to interact with them. So of all these people, that would probably be the last person that they would say would be his neighbor. The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So in this scenario, we've got several players. We've got the guy that got the snot beat out of him and all his clothes and everything taken. We've got two leaders in a Jewish church. And we've got this Samaritan guy who knew the penalty for interacting with Jewish people. Does this sound familiar at all to kind of what's been going on the last several months in our country? Last several decades, last couple hundred years? You know, whether it's back, when immigration started, and in New York you had different areas where the Italians lived and the Irish lived, and all the and even the white people were looked down upon because they were Irish or they were Italian. That's not even to mention the big glaring one of slavery in this country and how that looked, right? And how even since the slaves have been released, just because you're free doesn't mean you're free, right? Just because you're not owned by anybody doesn't mean necessarily that you're free of oppression. Women have experienced the same thing in this country, right? And still in many places of the world, all these things are still happening. So Jesus gives an example of somebody who was looked down upon. The Samaritan dude was looked down upon by these Jewish people. But he's the one who did the right thing. Now, there are some laws in the Old Testament about touching blood and things like that. And this guy was probably pretty bloody and beaten up. And seeing as how these guys were priests and leaders in the Jewish community, they probably thought, well, I don't want to be unclean for a while, so I'm just going to let this guy go. These guys were leaders in the synagogues, in the churches. They weren't called churches there, but you get my point. These guys were the leaders in the Jewish community and in the Jewish faith. And they didn't do what somebody who wasn't a part of their faith does. And right now, so many in our communities, and so many in our nation, and so many in our world are looking to Christians about how they're going to respond to stuff going on right now. And unfortunately, Christians haven't responded real well. They've responded a lot like these Jewish leaders did. I love them. God says to love them, so I love them. What does that look like? This Samaritan dude was clearly heading somewhere. He clearly had some money. Took out some silver coins, but he took time to use his own stuff to meet this guy's needs where he was at, and then put him on his own donkey, and he walked the rest of the way to town while this guy was riding on his donkey, took him to an inn, basically a hospital, gave the guy money and said, if that's not enough, I'll be back and pay it later. Who knows what your town is like? You may not live in a Chicago or a Baltimore or Washington, D.C. Maybe you live in Dunkirk, Ohio, like 20 houses. or Arlington or Findlay or whatever, right? Maybe there's not a whole lot of diversity in your community, but I guarantee there are people who are looked down upon, right? You don't have, in your schools, if you're there now, who knows, right? But in your schools, when you were there was always that group or that person or those people that you didn't interact with. Either A, because they were the cool kids, but they were jerks and they were rude to everybody else, or because you were the cool kid and they were the outcasts. Both groups struggle with each other. Then there's the band people, and then there's the scholastic people, and then there's the athletes, and then there's, right? There are plenty of people, regardless of skin color or gender or where you live or how smart you are, right? There are people who feel like an outcast at all times. Is it easy to love people who are just like you? Ask a husband and wife. Maybe that doesn't go so well. But listen, if you like Ohio State football, yay, they're going to play in a couple weeks here. But if you like Ohio State football and you find another Ohio State football fan, I travel down to Florida in the summer for vacation. And along the way, if you see another Ohio State fan, you say OH and they say IO, and it's great. But you get this close up here to Michigan and you start seeing some maize and blue, and it's hard to love those people, isn't it? Yeah. But us Buckeye fans, boy, we stick together. God didn't just call us to love the people that are just like us, that like all the things we like, that like the same pizza toppings, that agree that pineapple should never go on pizza. Right? Like, he didn't call us to just love the people that are easy to love. He said, love your neighbor, and we're asking, well, who's our neighbor? Because I've only got a limited amount of supplies here, and I've only got a limited amount of love to give. And if I'm supposed to love my neighbor, is that like literally the people right next door to me? Does that include a person across the street from me? Or is that just somebody that I encounter along the road that's got the snot beat out of them? Your neighbor is everyone. Just like the kids' song, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in his sight. Which, to call people those colors is kind of racist, but we won't go there. But my point is, if God made them, hello, everybody, then that's who we're supposed to love. That's not easy. When you disagree on which lives or whose lives matter, or whether you agree on which party you're going to vote for, or which candidate you're going to vote for, or whether you agree on a mask, or whether you agree on if you should be in school, or whether or not you should go to church because it's not safe, or whether or not you should go in this door only and come out that door only. So many things in the last 6 months to argue about and hate each other over, and God has just said, I don't care, just love them. If somebody wants to wear a mask, love them. If somebody doesn't want to wear a mask, love them. Some people say, well, you're not wearing a mask. You don't love appropriately. Well, listen. Love. We're going to dive into some stories tomorrow at our classes that we're going to that Sean and I are going to teach tomorrow. Depending on how many people show up, we don't know. We didn't do a sign up for this retreat, so we have no clue how many people are going to show up. But we're going to talk about a young lady who had 5 husbands and was kind of the outcast in society. That's bad these days when that kind of thing happens on a more regular basis. It was real bad back then. And she was living with somebody. And Jesus loved her first. We're going to talk about another young lady who they kind of used to set Jesus up, kind of like this story here, where they were setting Jesus up to fail so they could attack him. And they were using this young lady because the law said if you're caught in adultery, you're supposed to get stoned and killed right away, like immediate, like drag him out in the street, throw a rock, hit him in the head, kill him. Jesus loved her when nobody else did. When she was just a pawn in their game to destroy Jesus, Jesus showed her love, which in turn showed them love. And finally, we'll talk about a guy who had leprosy. For those of you who don't know what leprosy is, it's basically a skin-eating disease, and it eats the skin so much that you lose feeling in your extremities, and then you get an infection, and it falls off, and you're just losing body parts, and it's so infectious. This is a great story for today because it's so infectious that they had to live separately. They had to quarantine, and if anybody came near them, they had to scream, I'm unclean, don't come close to me." And you'll see in the story that Jesus actually went to him and touched him to heal him. If you know somebody who had coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, whatever you want to call it, right? There's lots of different names. Because there's 19 different coronaviruses. I don't know if you knew that, but there are. And you knew they had it, would you go hang out with them and touch them and give them hugs and, share a fork with them? No. Because then you would get it. And Jesus knew the consequences of this. He knew the social consequences of it. But he touched him anyways. So we're going to dive into how Jesus loves first. And in this story, what we're supposed to take from this is, it doesn't matter who it is. Love them first. That doesn't mean agree with everything they do. Does it? No. It doesn't mean you have to agree who you're going to vote for. It doesn't mean that you have to agree which football team you're going to root for. It doesn't mean you have to agree what church to go to. It doesn't, any of that stuff. He said, love them. That's it. That's hard. It's a lot easier if you said, do these 3 things and gave me 3 things that I could just check off and just okay, I did these 3 things, so now we're good. And that's what this guy was kind of looking for. He was kind of setting Jesus up to say, well, there's 10 commandments. If you follow those, you're good. You see, God gave the people 10 commandments because they needed some rules. But all along, the whole intention, and this verse that this guy quoted was from the Old Testament that God gave to the people. Love God with all your heart and your soul and your mind and your strength, literally with everything you have, and do the same to the people around you. Sometimes it's hard to love God because we can't feel him, we can't see him. He doesn't answer our prayer the way we talked about. Sean talked about that this summer. For camp and dealing with that disappointment. But it's even harder to love people because we mess up and we're not perfect. But let me challenge you with this. If you set your mind on a setting, I got real loud there all of a sudden, sorry. If you set your mind on a setting of, I don't care what anybody does, I don't care what anybody says, I don't care how anybody treats me, I'm going to treat them the same way. If your default setting is, I'm going to love no matter what, it's a little bit easier, because when you start making decisions about who you're going to love and how you're going to love them and who deserves your love, that's when it gets hard. And guess what? God doesn't do that to us. None of us really deserve his love and his grace and his mercy. We just don't. Have you ever had a friend or a loved one or an acquaintance that did something kind of nasty to you? They gossiped about you. They told a lie about you to your friends so they would all hate you. They tripped you in the hallway. I had a kid, the bully when I was in 7th grade was in 8th grade, which is funny because he was like the shortest kid. It was kind of like on A Christmas Story, the little short kid that was, they finally stood up to him and beat the snot out of him. But it was a little short kid, and we were in the basement of the school, which is where the locker rooms were for the gym class. And I was carrying my books because I wasn't cool enough to have a backpack, So I'm carrying my books. And he comes up, he goes, "You know what I heard?" I'm like, "I don't know what you heard." He goes, "I heard you dropped your books." And he tried to knock my books out of my hand, but I held on to them. I was like, "You're wrong." But people that do that kind of stuff, right? Like that knock your books out of your hands or call you names or nowadays get on social media and just blast you or lie about you. Guess what? We do very similar things in our relationship with our Creator God. If nothing else, we don't behave and represent Him well. My wife, every time the kids leave the house, says the last word she says after "I love you" is "represent me well." And Christians, we're not doing that right now. We're being divisive, we're being hateful, we're being judgmental, and that's not what He's called us to do. If we are going to rely on a politician, and I don't care if it's a donkey or an elephant, blue or red, if we're relying on a presidential candidate or a congressman or a mayor to bring peace, never going to come. It has to start with the millions and millions and millions of Christians that are not just in this country, but in other countries around the world. Because guess what? If we lived this, if we loved God and loved each other, and love was our first reaction, and listen, you can ask my family, I'm not great at love being my first reaction. Even if it's just my face, right? My face tells a lot of stories that I am unaware of, but my family's like, if we could just take a picture of your face right now. If love was our first reaction, not what we eventually got to down the road, people wouldn't feel alienated. People wouldn't be judged. People wouldn't be discriminated against. People wouldn't have the depression that they're feeling. They wouldn't have the anxieties they're feeling. They wouldn't go through all the bullying they're going through. I can't control how somebody treats me. I can only control how I treat them. Right? The only person you can control is yourself. So my challenge you tonight, we'll end with this, and then we'll have a couple announcements about tomorrow. My challenge you tonight is to love first. Love your sister first. Love your dad first. Love your friends first. Love your teachers first. Love your neighbor first. Love the person who doesn't look like you first. Love the person who doesn't agree with you first. Love a Michigan fan. I mean, come on, right? Like, they're there. They love Jesus too, I suppose. Love. Have that be your default. So that when people encounter you, they want to know why you're different. Because guess what? That is different. It's so common in society to judge and to have bias. Not what we're called to do at all. Try it. People will think you're weird, but that's all right. They thought Jesus was weird. Try loving. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., if you go through our website, you'll get to our Zoom page again like we did for camp this summer. We'll be teaching, I think the first lesson is on the woman at the well. At 1 o'clock, we'll be back, which gives you a couple hours to get some other stuff done, get some lunch, whatever. Come back at 1 o'clock, and then we'll talk about, I believe, the leper. And then at 2 o'clock, a guy that Sean and Christina, and I think Scott and Sarah actually went to Ohio Valley College, Christian College down in Parkersburg, his name is Haas Ridgway. In the past, we've had a comedian actually went to church here. I believe he's moved, but his name was Will, and he did some magic with his comedy. This guy, Haas, does a lot of music with his comedy, and he's actually set it up, so he's going to play some trivia with us tomorrow with some prizes that he'll send out. So we're super excited about that from 2 to 3. Get a couple more hour break, eat some dinner, maybe take a nap, whatever, right? Enjoy the sunshine because it's supposed to be beautiful tomorrow. And then come back at 7 o'clock, and from 7 to 8, we'll finish up with our retreat, virtual retreat this week. If you've got friends that want to join and they live in Texas or they live in California, just send them to the website. Again, that's beesonministries.com. Sam has it all linked through there, so we can just click a link and go right to the room. And then if we need to go out from there, we will. So we'll love to see you tomorrow. Would love to see you at Camp Glen and hug you good night tonight, but that's just not going to happen. So find somebody to love. And then repeat and repeat and repeat. I'm super excited about the curriculum for tomorrow, diving into those stories and really having good discussion about how Jesus just treated people. And hopefully we can learn a bit from that. One quick announcement. Sorry, I covered the wrong thing. I should have covered this. Starting October 1st, that's a Thursday night, we are going to start a weekly Bible study for anybody who wants to come to our Zoom room and do that. There will be different teachers throughout the year. It's not just going to be me the whole time. Sam's going to lead us off. Mayor McCoy's going to do it. Maybe Sean will do it, and then Dave Pack, and then me. And we're going to take turns doing that so we keep it fresh. But we wanted to provide a situation where we're not just together 3 times a year. We wanted to give you some weekly encouragement. It would be a great way to invite your friends who you are thinking of inviting to camp or to the winter retreat. And that would be a great way to get involved. It's going to be Thursday nights from about 7 to 8. We understand if you've got other things going on, that's fine. If we have 10 people, we have 10 people. If we have 100 people, we have 100 people. Who knows, right? But we want to start that on Thursday, October 1st, from 7 to 8. We'd love to have you there. Last thing before we sign off tonight, we have made a decision to push back the winter retreat about 3 weeks. It's usually, last year it was like February 21st, which is actually the last time we were actually physically together. So it will be over a year before we see each other's faces live. And so we wanted to push it back about 3 weeks just to give us a chance to get past all this garbage, right? We may not be able to do that. We may have to do this yet again. The good news is we've got the equipment now, so let's do it, right? So we're probably looking at like the second weekend in March for the winter retreat, and we will have lots more information about that, obviously, right after the first of the year, because we'll do that in March. And in Ohio, the good news is it's still like snowing and wintry, so it can still be a winter retreat, right? It's officially winter for another week after that, so we're good. And then camp next summer. Pray about that, right? All right. We love you guys. Thanks for being here tonight. And Sam's got a little video we're going to play out. So if you want to have see some of the announcements we just made, they're on there on the Facebook page and the YouTube page as well. Thanks for joining us tonight. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Love you guys.